Welcome to the SaaS Backwards Podcast, where we reverse engineer the success of fast-growing SaaS firms and explore strategies CMOs and CEOs are using to drive their businesses forward.
Welcome to SaaS Backwards, a podcast that helps SaaS CEOs and CMOs to accelerate growth and enhance profitability. Our guest today is Mo Hallaba, CEO at Datawisp, which helps business users to make data-informed decisions without coding or complicated business intelligence tools by asking questions in plain English. Hey, Mo, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Ken. I'm really happy to be here and talk about SaaS and AI and other buzzwords as well.
Yeah, this is the buzzword episode. So if you've been dying to be buzzworded out, this is your place to be. But in all seriousness, before we dig in to our episode, we had a great prep session last month. Just tell us a little about your background, a little unusual background to be a SaaS entrepreneur. So please tell us a little bit about that and something about Datawisp.
Yeah, a little unusual perhaps. I started my career at Merrill Lynch in equity research way back when in 2007. Second day on the job, my boss downgraded 29 banks at once because that was right as the financial crisis was starting. So it was an interesting time to just be starting out in finance. I spent about 10 years in finance working in different banking M&A roles, strategy, built a bank from scratch in Mexico, which is a fun story, but eventually decided that I wanted to do something a bit more personally rewarding and something closer to the areas where I was passionate about. And so I decided to quit banking and start my own gaming startup. It's a gaming social media platform where people could share interesting highlight clips and stuff. And this is like before you could add GIFs and music and stuff in Instagram. So we built this and it was like first of its kind and got a bunch of users and then realizes that user acquisition is actually a really hard problem to solve, especially when you don't have money for it. But at the same time, I started a networking group for people in the gaming industry because I realized I didn't actually know anybody in that space. And so that grew pretty quickly, and I ended up meeting my co-founders from Datawisp through that. So I owe it all to that networking group.
So you made a transition from what I imagine was a fairly lucrative career in banking to wanting to be an entrepreneur. How did you manage that transition?
Well, I thought about it for a while, and I was in the period where I would get home and then work till 3 a.m. on my startup and then get back into the office in the morning and just be completely dead. And it got to a point where I said, if I really care about this thing and I want to make it work, I need to be able to dedicate more time to it. And so I just resigned. I just went to my boss and said, hey man, sorry, I'm out. And I decided to do the thing that I was passionate about because in the end, you don't get that many opportunities. And I was a bit younger then and could afford to take a bit more risk. So I went for it.
And what was that first thing you were trying to build?
So I was trying to build a place where as a gamer, sometimes you do something that's really cool or exciting and you want to share it with people because it's those little like ESPN moments in video games where you go, oh my God, I can't believe I did that or whatever, or that worked, or oh man, we got our ass kicked really bad. And so being able to clip those and then like add like music and funny animations and stuff to it to turn them into memes and then share them with other people was an idea that I had. And so we actually built it, and it was a web platform where people could log in and do all that stuff. And we managed to get like a decent amount of users that were using it and really liked the platform. But I never actually accounted for the difficulty of user acquisition or the expense of user acquisition. When I was doing that, I thought if you just build something really good, people will just use it. Because back then I was thinking of Facebook basically was my only social media expertise. And boy, I was super wrong. So that's not how it works at all.
Yeah, it definitely is more complicated than that for most.
Yeah. You need to have a recurring way to continue bringing people to the site. And one of the things we noticed is that even though gamers are very passionate, they may not have many other friends who are gamers, right? So you rely on people meeting other people on the platform that share common interests and stuff. And so you can't rely necessarily on like network effect like Facebook did, where you just invited every single one of your friends onto the platform, right? Because you might only have 1 or 2 friends that could participate in this.
Interesting. Yeah, I've actually noticed that kind of social aspect to people who are gamers in our own family and friendship groups. It's definitely a thing. Well, although it's gotten a lot more popular, right? But you started this networking group also. And I thought this was an interesting strategy, if you will, to try and drive some, I guess, friction with the community you wanted to be more involved with. And I've seen it before. There used to be an enterprise sales group that actually ended up in multiple cities. The founders were people that had an interest in sales and marketing. And so they wanted to meet more entry-level and mid-level salespeople. So I'm wondering what the idea was with your networking group and how did it fit into it?
Yeah, so we called it Esports Industry and Investments. And that was like I was trying to think of like a sexier name, but really couldn't come up with anything better than that. The idea was I wanted to gather people who worked in the gaming and esports industries and also VCs who were interested in investing in that space, because at the time it was pretty hot and it was attracting a lot of attention. So I figured it would be a cool idea for people who are looking for funding and people who are looking to deploy resources into the space. And then also New York is not really known as like an esports hub, but kind of marketing and like brand deals drove a lot of the revenue for esports back then. And New York is a very big hub for marketing and ad spend and all that. So there actually were esports and gaming people in New York. They just didn't really do that many organized events or anything. So I started organizing these events and people were really eager to show up and participate. And we grew pretty quickly. I think I had one event where we had like equity research analysts from like bulge bracket banks were coming to hang out and like listen to the insights in my living room.
That's awesome. And did it provide any business benefit to your other endeavors?
I definitely ended up getting connected with some people. So for the social media business, one of the things we wanted to do is be able to provide people prizes as an incentive to post stuff. I found a number of brands that were willing to come in and give either gift cards or keyboards or whatever as like prizes, just meeting them through these groups and stuff. So that was actually beneficial, but that also kind of depended on me being able to grow that on its own. And so had that been more successful, like probably would have benefited more from the networking. But where it was really useful is I ended up meeting the three co-founders that I have now. And I actually ended up getting a lot of experience in the gaming industry. So I ended up like advising a esports team called Flipside Tactics for a while. And they were really sharp when it came to like training players and buying them and using these cool analytics tools to improve them and win tournaments with really low salary expenses. But they needed some help with some things that I was good at, like writing presentations and emails and things, skills I developed from 10 years of banking. And so we started working together and met these people. And I realized they had this really cool analytics tool that they're using. And that, in fact, the application was so cool that other teams wanted to use it also. And so obviously for competitive reasons, they can't own the software that the other teams are training with. So they spun it out into its own company. And then that started growing. And then the broadcasters that would play the matches on TV said, well, it would be cool if we could show some of these like heat maps and stuff, just like you see on ESPN. And so we started doing that. And that company started growing and getting more customers pretty quick. And so we ended up focusing more on that. So that was like the biggest thing that came out of this group is I ended up going down that path of like data and analytics products, even though it was still focused on gaming at the time.
There's a lot to unpack there in a good way. The idea of starting some kind of live event group to gather people who could contribute to your entrepreneuring, is maybe underappreciated. I've seen it done a few times. I mentioned the enterprise sales group. We actually did one in the early days when HubSpot wasn't all that organized around its user groups. And it was a great way to find like-minded people and just meet people who might be either clients or business partners or just people that would be of interest to us, even possibly other professionals we could bring into engagements. So if you're out there and you're entrepreneuring and you're in Chicago and there isn't a great group around, your area of endeavor, that might be something to think about starting and also being willing to abandon if it doesn't gain traction, right? Like try it for 4 or 6 meetings and see if you can get people to show up. And
one of the hardest parts of entrepreneurship, honestly, is just knowing when to be like, hey guys, this is not working. The first meetup we did was, I discussed this with like a couple of my friends, and we're like, yeah, let's do it. And so the first one was me, my brother, my two friends that I discussed it with, and one other guy that showed up that nobody knew. So it was like, hey man, what's going on? And then we were like, well, should we do this again? And we did another one, and that one was like 20 people. And so sometimes you just have to keep trying.
Yeah, and even more established companies can do that. You can start a series of events on a topic that can feed into your funnel, right? And see if it gains some momentum. And if it doesn't, it was a good try.
You take a few pictures and you say, hey, we got together and we talked about this, and that creates some FOMO. People go, man, I missed out on this cool gathering, and then they show up to the next one. So
yeah, and also live events, I think, are beginning to gain real traction again. It's been a kind of a slow ramp up, but I think all of a sudden people are realizing, wow, I got a lot more out of that than I thought I would. I want to do it again. And they're actually, I think, searching again for live events to attend. So
yeah, definitely.
It's been a long road out of the pandemic cocooning for sure.
Definitely. I think people are also starting to figure out how inefficient remote work is, although a lot of people won't want to admit it. Sit down in person with somebody for an hour, you just get so much that you don't get online as well.
I think it's somewhere between unpopular and controversial to advocate for in-person work. But I certainly see in our business, there's a fair amount of what we do that's creative and collaborative, and hard to pull that off over Zoom, though now my team is so geographically dispersed. We're stuck with this, but I'm a big believer in sitting next to someone, especially for early career people. I think they should be looking for the in-person work experience.
It's about the stuff that you get when you're not in the Zoom meeting. It's the water cooler conversations, the walking by and seeing someone doing something interesting and asking them about it. There's so much going on that you don't get when you go, okay, bye, and you turn off your thing and then you get up and do whatever you were doing at your house.
Let's talk a little bit more about this idea of blowing a little life into something and seeing what happens. It's an interesting perspective about starting projects and seeing where they'll lead rather than committing your entire life energy to a project. Can you give some color commentary to that?
A lot of startup founders I've seen just commit really hard to an idea. They go, hey, I have an idea and this is my idea. And I'm going to commit to this idea and I'm going to go down with the ship if it's not working, right? And the way I see it, you always want to be talking to as many people as possible. You want to be gathering as much information, even if you have a lot of conviction in your idea. It might not be that you end up doing a different idea or that you don't go with the startup, but it might just be that you make certain adjustments based on information that you collect from people. But in some cases, you might pivot out of that idea into something adjacent that is much more lucrative or that people are a lot more interested in than you might have expected, right? And so it's kind of like when you think of the scientific method, you go, hey, I have this idea, and then you collect evidence, and then you go, well, is this still a good idea? And you go, yes, the evidence points to yes, or I continue doing it. And so if you do that many times, you're more likely to end up at product market fit, in my opinion, because as you're building, you're kind of validating that people do want the thing and people are willing to pay for it. And people would use it if it had XYZ features and et cetera, right?
So have there been projects that fell by the wayside before we got to where we are today?
Features and things that we thought were important that we didn't really gather enough interest about. We had this one idea back when we were still working on like esports stuff. We had this idea that we were going to build an SDK that game developers would put in their game, and it would do all this cool stuff on Twitch. And then we started building a pretty basic version of it, and all of a sudden realized that people don't really want to put your SDK in their game. It's like a huge pain in the ass. And so they have to have a lot of conviction around the thing that you're doing, and you have to really be able to demonstrate immediate value if you're going to get them to put an SDK in their game. And the thing we were doing was cool, but it wasn't the kind of thing where they would just go, oh, I need to have this SDK in my game, right? And so that we just realized that what that would lead to is just a really disgusting sales cycle and just a huge headache in terms of getting people onboarded and stuff. And so we figured, all right, let's work on something else instead.
Is this team you're working with today, how long have you all been together?
So we've been working together basically since 2018, 2019. We've got a really cool team with experience in a lot of different areas. And then obviously like technically very talented. One of the things I realized is when you do work in esports, you do a lot of stuff that's specific to particular games. So Counter-Strike or Dota or whatever. And each game has very different technology and APIs and things like that. If you want to be successful in esports, you need a team that can quickly adapt to the differences in technologies between the games and just be able to make stuff work really quickly. And one of the things that impressed me about these guys is just how quickly they're able to shift from game to game and just build amazing stuff. And so when we ended up working on Datawisp together, this actually ended up really being valuable, because what if we added AI to it? Okay. And then within a couple of weeks, we had a prototype, and like nobody had touched this stuff before. And so it was just really cool to have that kind of skill set on the team of just being able to experiment with different technologies really quickly and iterate.
Early in my career, I built systems for Citi, and we had this multidisciplinary team, and basically threw them at anything and they would figure out how to get it done. And if at that time the tools didn't exist, we built them. I think for a tech entrepreneur, having a solid team of technologists that you can throw at a problem and have them solve it is something to keep with you from startup to startup, right?
Yeah. And as different technologies come by, people always start looking for someone who's an expert. It's the funniest one to me is like blockchain. So people started saying, we're looking for blockchain engineers. And I'm like, there's no such thing as blockchain engineers. There's good engineers and there's bad engineers. And so we didn't have any blockchain experience, but we wrote a Solana integration for Datawisp in 4 days because Noah is an amazing engineer. What it comes down to is that ability to just read a bunch of documentation of something brand new and understand it, and then just start writing code and get something done really quick. That's just talent.
Yeah, I think that's a great little morsel. I think for non-technical entrepreneurs, non-technical CEOs, the ability of a programmer, analyst, engineer, whatever the current titling is going to be, their innate ability to understand the applicability of a piece of technology and how they can make it work in the business is one of the most highly valuable things. And I totally agree with you.
Yeah. Because even like within Datawisp, there's a lot of different technologies. There's the AI stuff. We have a charting library that we hooked up. We have all these tools that we use. And I'm constantly amazed by the ability to just integrate something in like 1 or 2 days.
Yeah, I remember I was a good enough programmer. And I remember there were a couple of guys I worked with who constantly astonished me with their ability to do just that. Like imagine a solution and then go build it. And those are the people you want. And it doesn't matter what the tool set is. They're going to be able to build it. And I think I don't know how you recruit for that, but
it's tough. Recruiting is hard, man.
Yeah, it is. That's probably the hardest thing for so many of us in business, especially if you have to do it over Zoom, right? You don't get to meet them in person. Maybe that's why you need to start a networking group so that you can meet the people honestly, you want to work with.
And especially when you work in startups, in general, you want people who are like motivated and driven in the same kinds of ways that you are. And so the people that tend to show up to these events have a slightly different mindset than everybody else, in my opinion.
Agreed. So I want to turn our attention a little bit to Datawisp itself, some kind of fundamental stuff, and then the solution itself. So I noticed you had some early stage and seed funding a couple of years ago. Was that going to be enough to drive growth? I mean, is there a financial plan to grow further faster, or are you looking for more organic growth? So what's the plan there?
We're obviously always trying to continue growing. So we raised our seed round in summer 2022. And at the time, our mission is the same that it is now, which is to help non-technical people be able to get insights from data and act on that as easily as possible, right? And so traditionally, when you did no code analytics or low code analytics for business people, it tended to be basically a dashboard that some engineer had made with some buttons that you could press that changed the dashboard slightly. And they go, no code. But essentially what that is like a little playpen for the business people to play in. And then they're only basically allowed to ask questions because essentially you've just limited the data to the stuff here.
They can only push the buttons that an engineer put there.
Yeah, exactly. You can change this slider and it changes the time range on this chart. No code. But what we wanted to do was basically give not people like myself the ability to transform and manipulate data in the same way that someone would do with code, but just without code. So we started building Datawisp, and this was like before AI was in vogue. But we built this cool system and then added AI functionality to it later. And So we've been doing that for a while. Our plan is still the same, is to acquire users and do another round of funding. You can grow organically or bootstrap it or whatever, but the innovation in this space is so fast that you want to be able to raise money. You want to be able to go hire more talented people. You want to have money to deploy on marketing and things like that. As we talked about, user acquisition is not easy, especially when you have a 6-person startup and CEO is probably doing most of the sales. It's just not like, you just can't scale as fast as you need to, because someone else might go raise $50 million and then all of a sudden they can build cool stuff also. So it's kind of an arms race to the top, which is why the venture model is what it is, right?
Certainly the bootstrapper's dilemma is just that, right? I don't believe in software moat. Honestly, I think there's almost no such thing as a moat, but I think there is market share and financial moat. You can look at really successful companies like Microsoft. Almost none of their stuff is the best, but it's not the best software necessarily, but it's the most well-funded, best sold software. So
I think in startups, also in early stage, the biggest moat is execution. An idea is worth nothing these days. Anyone can have an idea, right? It's all about, can you actually execute? Can you build this product as well as the customer needs it to work, right? Can you sell? Can you write 1,000 emails until you get your first 10 customers or whatever? Like, can you actually do that? It's not easy. We've done the bootstrapping thing in the past. It's a different way of doing business. Personally, I like the VC model more because it just encourages failing fast. So either I have something that's a good idea and there is actual product market fit and I can find customers, and I know in my head that I want my business to reach a certain scale, right? And so what VC does is it accelerates that. It goes, okay, you have a good idea, here's a bunch of money. And if that money runs out and you can't scale, then it wasn't a good idea, or you don't have the ability to execute, right? Whereas with bootstrapping, you can spend a lot of time customizing your product for a specific client because you want to get paid, or changing or doing custom work instead of making your platform better and stuff. And then you might have some customers, but you don't really know if it's like something that can get to the scale that you want. And some people are happy with that. I'm trying to build something that can change the world. So we kind of need that VC scale.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. The bootstrapper can turn his or her gaze on almost anything and justify the detour, right?
Yeah.
And when you have investors that you've sold a vision to, they sort of got to follow through on that or have a good reason not to by the next quarterly meeting. So
they don't mind, investors don't mind pivots as much as people think, because ultimately they like making money just like everybody else. And so if you have a better idea than the one you pitched them, they're down for that. But the thing is, yeah, you have to be kind of laser focused on doing things that not necessarily scalable today, but that can eventually be scalable. And what we found when we were bootstrapping is that we were building a lot of stuff that was like highly customized for a particular client, but there's no way we'd be able to replicate that 100, 1,000, 1,000,000 times.
Excellent. That's a great insight, and a good place to move on a little bit. Again, a little bit more about your own go-to-market motion. How are you guys generating opportunities? What's the marketing and sales process to drive inquiries, qualify, and close?
So Datawisp is in a strange category. BI and data analysis in general, when you think about it, what need does BI solve, right? And like BI is a thing that if everyone in your company does whatever, you get better over time, and everybody understands the value of data and analytics and all that. It doesn't like, what need does this mug solve? It allows me to drink my tea that I need every morning, otherwise I can't function, right? So BI is a little different. With Datawisp, what we found is that when people see it working, they're like, oh, this is magic. I could use this, right? When people just hear about it in like an email or something, or if they just see, hey, do more with your data, like that's not particularly compelling. So we've been working to just get the product in front of people as much as possible, to show cool videos of Datawisp doing awesome stuff. We just launched a feature. It's in testing, but you can push literally just one button and it generates a whole dashboard with like 10 different charts about your data. If you go, hey, I don't even know where to start. Well, you start here. Here's 10 things about your data that's interesting, right? So we try to do this cool, like magical stuff in video form and then just put it in front of people. So we organize events and we show it to people. We go to events, we talk to people, we put videos on LinkedIn. We're backed by a company called Play Ventures. They have a Slack where there's a bunch of other Play Ventures portfolio companies. And sometimes I'll just make a video of a feature we've developed and just toss it in there. Somebody will be like, hey, we saw your thing. So it's just about finding every opportunity to put videos of Datawisp doing cool stuff in front of people. That's worked the best by far.
I think video is very powerful when you have a visualization product, right? You need to give people a frame of reference for what that might look like for them. And it's really hard to do that in words. It's got to be in moving pictures.
So most people, the way they do some of the stuff that Datawisp does now is essentially they have a guy named Steve who does all their data things. And so when they want something, they open Gmail or Slack and they go, hey, Steve, I need this. And so when you go, Datawisp makes it easy to get insights from data. And they go, well, it's easy to get insights from data. I just email Steve and he does it for me, right? But when they see, that with the same effort of emailing Steve, they can get the answer in 5 seconds, then all of a sudden they go, oh, okay, I understand now.
So it sounds like one of the important benefits here is that it accelerates the time to insight, right? And allows you to find better insights.
Yeah, Datawisp. And I mean, we've got a lot of plans. We actually just did an event at New York Tech Week yesterday about this. We had a panel of, is AI going to replace your data scientist, right? The answer is Datawisp is not replacing your data scientist who's like building fancy models and working on high-end stuff, right? But what Datawisp can do is it can take those 100 things that they get asked a week by your business people that stop them from doing the really clever stuff and do them in just a few seconds, right? So most questions of like, hey, show me a chart that does this, or what's the average spend by this type of person on this type of product? Most of these take like 5 seconds. Just waiting for them to receive the email takes 5 seconds before they can even open it.
That's awesome. I checked out the website just today, in fact, and I noticed that you have 2 main paths to conversion operating.
Yep.
You have the book a demo path and you have the sign up path. And I didn't go through the sign up process, so I don't know what's on the other side of that. Are you actually putting the product in people's hands?
We tried a couple of different approaches, actually. So we initially, when we launched Wispy, which is our AI assistant, we wanted to just get tons of people using it and collect a bunch of data. And so we ran some Google ads. We have a 2-week free trial that you can just get into just by going into the website and clicking try now, right? So everything was open and you could do that. And what we found was that people were churning for reasons that were incredibly difficult to do anything about. So when you're selling B2B SaaS, right, there's a lot of nuances in terms of like what kind of data you should put in, what kind of questions you should ask. Who is this person who's coming in from the internet? Are they a legitimate business user? So we ended up spending so much time trying to make sure that everyone who was coming was, first thing we got was a wave of students trying to do their homework with Datawisp. So we tried a million things just to get rid of every student because that's not who we wanted to target, right? So we did that. And then we built this tech to look at people's, like the data that they were importing, whether it was like formatted correctly or not. And then we realized that most of the people who were getting bad answers from Wispy just had terribly formatted data that wasn't, there's like correct data. And then there's like some Excel file that you made. And a lot of people were importing the latter. And no AI data analysis tool is going to be good if you're just importing garbage you made in Excel, right? So this having it like completely open to the public was cool in some ways because we were able to collect a lot of data about usage, but also kind of set us back because we weren't focusing on our target market and the types of customers that we knew we were looking for. We were instead kind of doing all this stuff to filter out noise. So what we did eventually is we just locked it and we said, you want to try Datawisp? Cool, book a demo. And then instead, we started focusing way more on going out and finding people who were our ideal customer and then reaching out to them and saying, hey, try this, book a demo, whatever.
I kind of think that what you're really doing in the book a demo meeting is a consultation, right? Maybe there's a demonstrative aspect of it, like, here's what you might do. You have to ultimately get them to tell you what their problem is and determine sort of problem solution fit at that point. When we do coaching for SaaS sales teams, we try and get the demo to be maybe the second or in a big sale, the third meeting. So I'm wondering how much those really look like demos and how much they really look like consultations on data and solution space?
So it's more the latter. So actually, when they schedule a demo, it's book your free data consultation and demo is the thing that they get on Calendly, right? And so what the first meeting is, tell us about the data you're collecting, tell us about the business problems that you're trying to solve. So first of all, it's what are your business goals? I want to grow my user base. I want to increase my profitability. And then second is tell us about the data you collect and tell us about what data challenges you face, right? And then they tell. And then generally we try to prepare in advance a demo that might work for a company like them. So if they're a game company and they have a certain type of game, we'll like fabricate artificial data set that looks like what we think their data might look like. And then ask them a bunch of questions. And then based on what they tell us, we can, when we show them a demo, we can go, okay, well, here's how you might solve this problem that you've just told me about using Datawisp. And then we show them. And there's been a couple people where they tell us, this is the problem I have. And we just tell them, Datawisp can't do that. And it's not going to solve the problem that you have. Right. And that's good because that doesn't waste anyone's time with more meetings. There was a company that had this like totally kind of unstructured quiz data. Kids were taking quizzes and they were writing out answers. And then they wanted Datawisp to basically tell them like what is a good answer and what's a bad answer. And we're like, that's not what we do. And if you want to do that, here's some recommendations of other tools that might be more useful to you.
It's interesting. I think as you were talking about how you set up for those demos, I was thinking, wow, if you had 5 or 6 or 8 vertical markets you were really focused on, you could almost have model data sets against those vertical markets, and the demos would become a lot more efficient to scale on. Kind of a cool thing to do early on, build them to the opportunities that are in front of you, but also you could scale that up.
To an extent, we do it when it gets into gaming. One, we have a lot more experience in that area. And 2, people tend to be a lot more particular. So if they have a racing game and you show them data for a shooting game, they just like, they can't understand what they're looking at. People are very focused. So typically gaming is an area where we try to be super focused. Otherwise, for like a B2B company, we have something that looks like that. We also, a data set that we've been using now is we have a fake scooter company. There's an app, you book a scooter, you ride it from point A to point B. That generally works for most standard business cases, where someone has an app or something consumer facing.
Awesome. Well, so I have just one more question. So looking back at your entrepreneuring career, any decisions that you wish you could revisit? And if so, why?
We don't play that game here. It's funny. There's so many every day. Like yesterday, there's stuff I did that I would have done differently. The day before, there's stuff I did. There's just so many opportunities to do things better. And the only thing that I think matters is just making sure that when you made a bad decision to just learn from that and not make that same bad decision again. If I go back to rec.gg, my first like failed social media startup, there's a million things I would have done differently. So 1, not budgeting for user acquisition, Dumbo. Like 2, I didn't actually have a technical team. I like hired a couple of developers to build it for me. I didn't have technical co-founders. Never do that, right? Like there's so many things where if I could go back and do X, I would. And I think that it's really easy to get stuck in this kind of...
Well, regrets aren't functional, right? Regret is not...
Yes, exactly. Oh man, I really wish I did this. That's useless because you didn't. And now you are where you are, right? But making sure you never make the same mistake twice, that's something that is super valuable.
Oh man, I'm still trying to do that. I'm still working on that one.
Making sure you don't make it 3 times.
There you go. There you go. Hey, this is a great place to land the episode. No regrets. This was an awesome episode. Thanks, Mo, so much for being here. If people want to reach out to you or learn more about Datawisp, how can they do that?
Sure. You can shoot me an email, mo@datawisp.io. You can find me on Twitter, electronic mo. I try to be as responsive as possible. So reach out.
Awesome. Thank you. And I'm on LinkedIn/in/Ken Lempit. If you haven't subscribed to the podcast yet, please do so wherever you get your podcasts. And we have a new YouTube channel. So that's another way to access episodes of the podcast. And my demand generation agency for SaaS companies is Austin Lawrence, and we're at austinlawrence.com. Hey, Mo, thanks again for being on SaaS Backwards.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to the SaaS Backwards Podcast, brought to you by Austin Lawrence Group. We're a growth marketing agency that helps SaaS firms reduce churn, accelerate sales, and generate demand. Learn more about us at www.austinlawrence.com. You can email Ken Lempet at kl@austinlawrence.com about any SaaS marketing or customer retention subject. We hope you'll subscribe, and thanks again for listening.